4, 3, 2.
Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the African American Task Force Safety and Justice Subcommittee. I'm the committee chairman, Representative Nnamdi Chukwucha. I'm glad to have you all with us today and look forward to our meeting. We will begin with our agenda item. Our first agenda item is our attendance. So if we could have our staff support go through the attendance.
Absolutely. Representative Chukwucha.
Present.
Kyle Myers. Gilmore Crosby. Tanita Congo. Spencer Price.
Present.
James Sherrard.
Present.
Karen Holland. Dr. Michelle Ratcliffe.
Present.
Dr. Tana Connell. Lisa Minatola.
Present.
James Diana.
Present.
Chief Deputy AG Alex Mackler.
Present.
Dr. Julius Mullen. Captain Fahima Keel.
Present.
Representative Ray Moore. Mr. Chair, we have 8 members present. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now move to the next item on our agenda, which is the acceptance of our minutes from our October the 28th meeting. They have been submitted to members. Are there any changes noted? If not, I will accept a motion to accept the minutes as written.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
It's been motioned and second that we accept the minutes. And I will now ask staff if we can call a roll vote for the acceptance.
Absolutely. Representative Chukwucha.
Present, yes.
Spencer Price.
Yes.
James Sherrard.
Yes.
Dr. Michelle Ratcliffe.
Yes.
Lisa Minatola.
Yes.
James Diana.
Yes.
Alex Mackler.
Yes.
Captain Fahima Keel.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, we have all members present voting yes.
Excellent, thank you. The minutes have been accepted as presented and written. We will now move forward to our third agenda item, which is a presentation by the Brennan Center for Justice regarding the restoration of voting rights. And I'll say as a preference for this was presented by our staff support. And it was a great presentation. We met with them and they gave us an overview of the presentation. I really think it fits solidly into our efforts, I guess the further efforts of our subcommittee in thinking in terms of the justice and the injustices that sometimes contribute to the violence and the community violence within our communities throughout our state. So with no further ado, I will hand the microphone to our presenters and look forward to the presentation.
Thank you so much, Representative. We're so incredibly appreciative of the opportunity to be here with you all today to talk about this important issue. Stuart has the presentation. I don't know if he's able to share his screen.
Yep, in the process of doing that right now.
Okay, great.
Can you all see that?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
I am, for some reason, not able to see it, but I've seen it plenty of times, so if everyone else can see it.
I'm sorry. Okay, there it
I
is.
see it now.
It was just lagging.
Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. And so, hi everyone. Again, my name is Patrick Berry, and I'm an attorney at the Brennan Center for Justice. We are a nonpartisan law and policy institute affiliated with NYU School of Law. And today, my colleague, Stuart Baum, and I are going to be talking about laws that take away the right to vote for people convicted of crimes also known as criminal disenfranchisement or felony disenfranchisement laws. I'm going to be focusing on this issue at the national level, and then Stuart's going to talk about where things currently stand in Delaware. Next slide, please. Today, there are over 5 million Americans barred from voting because of a past conviction. The vast majority of these citizens are no longer incarcerated. They're home, working, paying taxes, and raising families in their communities, yet they're not allowed to vote. And because of bias in the criminal system, Black and brown Americans are more likely than others to be disenfranchised because of a past conviction. Next slide, please. This discriminatory impact is no mistake. While criminal disenfranchisement laws can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece, and they existed in some parts of the United States from the Civil War, it wasn't until the expansion of suffrage to Black men that these laws became the major barrier to voting that they are today. After the Civil War, many states enacted a range of criminal laws designed to target Black citizens, while also adopting laws revoking the right to vote away from anyone convicted of a felony. These laws, which were enacted at the same time as poll taxes, literacy tests, and other Jim Crow laws, weren't limited to just the South. States all across the country, including California, Illinois, Nebraska, and New York, also adopted broad criminal disenfranchisement laws during this time. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this map, criminal disenfranchisement laws vary widely across the country, forming an incredibly confusing patchwork of state laws. 21 states bar people from voting only while they're in prison, meaning everyone who's living in the community can vote. Those states are in the darker blue. 2 states, Maine and Vermont, and Washington, D.C., which are in the lighter blue, never take the right to vote away, meaning people in prison can vote regardless of their crimes. The remaining 27 states fall somewhere in between, with varying rules on what parts of a sentence must be completed before voting rights are restored. Next slide, please. Navigating this patchwork of laws causes confusion for everyone, including election officials and prospective voters, about who's eligible to vote. Even within a single state, the rules can be confusing, contingent on things like the date and type of crime a person is charged with, whether it was an in-state conviction or an out-of-state conviction or federal, or even the type of fine or fee. Making matters worse, election officials often receive little to no training on their state's laws. The same is also often true of law enforcement and correction officials. These factors, coupled with complex and varying laws and complicated registration procedures, often result in the mass dissemination of inaccurate and misleading information. And this confusion has real consequences. In rare cases, it can lead to people being prosecuted for mistakenly voting despite being ineligible to vote. More commonly, it can result in the de facto disenfranchisement of untold numbers of people who are in fact eligible to vote but don't know they are, or refrain from voting out of fear of breaking the law. There's also evidence that denying the vote to one person has a spillover effect, dramatically decreasing the political power of marginalized communities. This makes sense when one thinks about how many people first experience voting in political engagement, their parents or other close family members or their neighbors. Criminal disenfranchisement laws also discourage healthy reintegration. There's no credible evidence that denying voting rights to people living in the community reduces crime. In fact, there's evidence that it might do just the opposite by working against positive long-term community reintegration. Studies have found that voting and civic engagement can lead to lower rearrest rates. So restoring voting rights can actually reduce crime in our communities. There's also evidence that restoring voting rights can result in greater trust and increased willingness to cooperate with law enforcement, essential components of improving public safety. And I would also just flag that some of those studies that I just mentioned were included in the materials that were shared before our presentation. And if there's any interest in further materials, especially any that go to the correlation between civic engagement and lower recidivism, we'd be more than happy to share those. Next slide, please. So fortunately, there has been sustained momentum for restoring voting rights over the years. And as a general matter, it bears noting that this is an issue where there has been some history of bipartisan interest and success. In the last 20 years, over a dozen states have taken some action, whether that be through legislation, executive order, or constitutional amendment to restore voting rights to people with past convictions. In 2018, Florida restored voting rights via constitutional amendment, while Louisiana did so legislatively. In 2019, New Jersey, Colorado, and Nevada enacted laws restoring voting rights, and Kentucky did the same via executive action. And in 2020, California restored voting rights via constitutional amendment, while Iowa did so by executive action, and Washington, D.C. did so legislatively. Rights restoration also became part of a national dialogue, with all major 2020 Democratic candidates for president taking a position on the issue. Next slide, please. Last year, there was even more progress. 3 states, Connecticut, New York, and Washington State, all passed laws automatically restoring the right to vote upon release from prison. Virginia's governor also used his executive authority to restore voting rights to all citizens living in the community, and the state's legislature advanced a proposed constitutional amendment that would make that action the law of the land. Many other states, including Alabama, Tennessee, and Texas, also considered bills that would have expanded or restored voting rights for people with past convictions. Now that we know where things stand at the national level, I'm going to turn it over to Stuart, who's going to talk about criminal disenfranchisement in Delaware.
Thanks, Patrick, and thank you again to the committee for having us. As Patrick mentioned, you might be wondering, where do things stand in Delaware right now? So, as it stands, rights are restored upon completion of sentence, which includes parole and probation for most offenses. What that means is that people residing in the community on probation and parole in Delaware cannot vote. Separately, people convicted of certain felonies, including murder, bribery, and sexual offenses, are permanently disenfranchised. And then on top of that, people convicted of certain election offenses are disenfranchised for a period of 10 years following the completion of their sentence. Taking all that together, an alarming 75% of those in the community who are currently disenfranchised are Black. And we take that from the same Sentencing Project report that we cited earlier. But just to pause on this for a moment, when we've compared this against other states that have similar policies, we don't really see that this alarming proportion in all these other states. It truly is a standout in an alarming way. Zooming out just a bit, as you can see, the vast majority of Delaware's neighbors actually restore voting rights upon release from incarceration if they ever take them away to begin with. While Maryland here is coded similarly to Delaware, they only actually allow disenfranchisement beyond incarceration for people convicted of certain election offenses. And as it stands right now, it doesn't appear that anyone is actually disenfranchised due to that provision. And instead, Maryland actually adopted a policy of automatic rights restoration upon release from incarceration for people convicted of all other offenses back in 2016. Now, as we shared earlier, the general trend has been that states took an interest in adopting criminal disenfranchisement after the Civil War, when they could no longer explicitly and directly disenfranchise Black men on the basis of their race. This was due to the ratification of the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guaranteed that right. Delaware, however, is somewhat unique in that it had already adopted a provision for criminal disenfranchisement in a prior constitution 30 years before the Civil War. However, after the Civil War and the ratification of the 15th Amendment, Delaware was finally forced to extend the franchise to Black men. And in response to that, Delaware adopted a new state constitution, which is the current state constitution, that introduced a brand new criminal disenfranchisement provision that appeared designed to target these newly enfranchised Black men. This was that 10-year disenfranchisement period for people convicted of certain election offenses, largely bribery for votes is what it was deemed. This extreme provision also allowed for people to be convicted and disenfranchised without either the right to a jury trial or the right to not be forced to testify against oneself, foundational rights. In debate over this provision, its drafters employed much of the same rhetoric we see being used today in order to pass restrictions on voting rights, characterizing their motive as defending the purity or integrity of the ballot, but this new provision seems to have been significantly inspired by a different motivation. Around the time of the drafting of this provision, controversial industrialist John Addicks became infamous in the state of Delaware for paying off the poll taxes of newly enfranchised Black voters who otherwise couldn't pay the poll tax themselves. Accordingly, this provision in the Constitution goes out of its way to disenfranchise the buyers and sellers alike, meaning the people who are having their poll taxes paid and the people paying that tax on their behalf. Maryland similarly adopted a provision like that in their post-Civil War Constitution, but they later reformed that provision in 1912, and they limited disenfranchisement to buyers only, which left Delaware as an extreme outlier in this regard. Thankfully, Delaware has a recent but long legacy of reform on this issue, starting all the way back in the year 2000, where a constitutional amendment that eliminated permanent disenfranchisement across the board passed with bipartisan support, followed up in 2013, where a constitutional amendment that eliminated a prior 5-year waiting period prior to rights being able to be restored, which also passed with bipartisan support. And most recently in 2016, where a prior requirement for the payment of legal financial obligations as a condition of your rights being restored, that was also eliminated by a statute. Moving forward, in order to restore voting rights for all people in the community in Delaware and change the current policy, a constitutional amendment will be needed. As you all are probably very well aware, in Delaware, a constitutional amendment must be passed by a 2/3 majority vote by members in both chambers of the General Assembly in 2 successive sessions. And also, as you probably are all very well aware, Democrats on their own have a 2/3 majority in the Senate, but are 2 seats short of that in the House. However, there are 2 Republicans who voted for the 2013 amendment, the most recent constitutional amendment on this issue, who are actually still in office, being Representative Ramon and Representative Spiegelman. We believe the legacy of bipartisan support in Delaware and the broad coalition pushing for reform across the nation may indicate that progress is possible on this issue in Delaware, even starting with this session or next. In just the last 3 years, 3 of Delaware's closest neighbors, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, all moved to allow everyone in the community to vote. This was made possible because a broad coalition of directly impacted people, law enforcement leaders, faith leaders, local election officials, and conservatives and libertarians alike all pushed for it to be done. That could be a successful model for how this could be done in Delaware. But you might be wondering, why do some such strange bedfellows all support this? Well, as Patrick mentioned earlier, law enforcement leaders agree that disenfranchisement doesn't improve public safety or deter crime. What works is encouraging people with past convictions to engage with their communities in a positive way. And voting is one of the ways that they can do that. Faith leaders know that no person is as bad as the worst thing they have done, and all people are worthy of a second chance, redemption, and forgiveness. As Patrick also mentioned earlier, election officials know that simplifying voting laws cuts down on confusion at the polls and what's called de facto disenfranchisement, which is the unintentional suppression of eligible voters who wrongly believe that they are, in fact, ineligible. It makes their job easier when it comes to administering elections, and the easiest and simplest policy is for everyone in the community to be allowed to vote. And then even conservatives and libertarians have lent their support to this coalition effort in some states. Conservatives and libertarians understand that disenfranchisement for what it is. It's taxation without representation. There is broad support for ending disenfranchisement for people who have already paid their debts to society and are living, worshiping, and working in the community. We take a look at these bills and these movements across the states, and our analysis of legislation in 2022 is currently underway. It's still very early in the session for many states, but we are already seeing new bills introduced to restore voting rights in even more states. For example, we may see New Mexico restore voting rights for people in the community on probation and parole in the coming weeks, as a bill to do just that has been introduced with robust support from their Secretary of State and Governor. Ultimately, Delaware has shown an amazing capacity to expand democracy. Just last year, you enacted automatic voter registration, which is huge. We believe that the time is now to move forward on restoring voting rights for everyone in the community. And if Delaware fails to act, it will keep falling behind other states on this issue and continue to disproportionately bar access to the ballot from people of color who are living, working, and thriving in the community. Delawareans deserve to live in a state that is a champion for democracy, where people with prior convictions are supported in their reentry, and where historical injustices have been corrected. That's all that we have to share with you for now, but we'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate the presentation. It's very informative. I will now ask if any members of the committee have any questions. Please raise your hand. Caitlin?
Thank you, Representative. I know I'm not a member of the subcommittee, but if you could indulge me for a couple questions.
Absolutely.
One is the two states that don't disenfranchise people with a criminal history at all, I believe were Vermont and Maine. Did they ever disenfranchise people at any point in the past? I guess I'm just curious if, at some point they did disenfranchise people and then had to pass legislation to just completely get rid of it.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Caitlin. So Maine and Vermont haven't had ever a policy of disenfranchisement for people with criminal convictions. And, coincidentally, they're also, two of the whitest states in America. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I'm also wondering, is there data about voter turnout, changes in voter turnout after some of our neighbors have done away with their voter disenfranchisement laws? I'm just curious, to see if there's been a noticeable increase in voter turnout as a result. I would hope that there would be.
So I know that there have been studies, and I wish my colleague Kevin was a part of this call because he knows all that stuff. But I'd be happy to dig those up and share those. That's certainly, something that legislators are often interested in knowing the answer to. And so I know they exist, and I'd be happy to share those with you. And I also believe he may even, Stuart, I don't know if you know if it's been published yet, but he was looking at just the effect of restoring voting rights in New York for people on probation.
Yeah, I'm not sure the current status of it, but I believe there's something to that effect that he has published before. But like Patrick said, we'd be happy to look into it and get back to you. And I'll say preliminarily, turnout is a challenge for this population when their rights are restored. But we are already seeing in states where they have done this that, people who get their rights restored do vote. And that, it's really just incumbent on states that restore voting rights to then take action to make sure that they're informed and supported in turning out to the polls.
Wonderful, thank you.
I would just quickly add to what Stuart said is, so at the Brennan Center, we advocate for automatic restoration of voting rights upon release from prison. And the reason why we advocate for that policy is that it establishes a bright, clear line for everybody. If you're not in prison, you're eligible to vote. And it just clears up the confusion for, prospective voters, for, nonpartisan groups that are doing voter engagement, for election officials, for law enforcement. Because it clears up this confusion, Stuart had mentioned during his part of the presentation, a policy of restoration upon release from prison really is supported by, local election officials, secretaries of state, et cetera. It just really makes things easier for them and easier for everyone else.
Thank you. I see we have a question from committee member, Mr. Sherrod.
Yes, I have a question, and I'm afraid it's just going to reflect my lack of knowledge about the Constitution. But I'm wondering, does the U.S. Constitution not hold as one of its mandates that citizens be allowed to vote, or does the states have the right to not adhere to that?
thank you so much for that question. That's a really good question. So it turns out there actually is no explicit right to vote in the federal Constitution. And there is a United States Supreme Court case called Richardson versus Ramirez, where the Supreme Court said that Section 2 of the 14th Amendment explicitly sanctions criminal disenfranchisement. And that Supreme Court decision has been, essentially probably the main reason why efforts to challenge states' criminal disenfranchisement laws in courts have been unsuccessful. And just given, the reality in terms of precedent, the battle to change laws really has been happening at, in state houses as opposed to courtrooms.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did have a question as well. One thing you mentioned during the presentation was about the voting rights and how engaged voters feel more, I guess, involved in individuals who are returning from incarceration. It added to their sense of community reintegration. Could you speak a little bit more about that in terms of, I think it really aligns with the work this committee is focused on in terms of building that relationship but between our community and improving ways to reduce crime.
Sure. And so, when you tell someone that they can't vote, even though they're living in their communities, they're working, they're raising families, they're going to school, they're going to church, and they're impacted by, policies that they can't have a say, you're, essentially telling them that they're a second-class citizen and that, that they shouldn't have a stake in their communities. Whereas when you restore voting rights and encourage people to vote and to be civically engaged, you're encouraging them to engage in, pro-social behavior and to view themselves as, part of the larger community and encouraging them to have a stake.
No, I would 100% agree and think, in terms of, I guess the way our laws are currently with the certain crimes and especially the election crimes, I'm thinking of other states that have similar and those who changed. In particular, I'm thinking of course, I think the crimes are big sticklers when you mention murder and rape, and those crimes stick out, and they tend to say individuals, they did something that violated, certain rules, and they're in a certain category, and this is one of those categories where they lost this right. How did states go about, I guess, refuting that argument? And then in terms of not only those crimes, but also the additional crime of election offenses, I think that would be a big one that would stick out as well.
Yeah, so to answer your first question regarding carve-outs, it's definitely an issue that we run into when we're doing this work in other states. But generally, the sort of messaging that we found to be most effective in regards to that is, if someone's living in the community, they've been, adjudged by the criminal system to be rehabilitated to return to the community. And so, legislators aren't experts in, the criminal justice system. And so they shouldn't be second guessing that determination. There also just really is, a lot of support for restoring voting rights among law enforcement. And, in all the states that we've worked in recently, so New York, Connecticut, California, and Washington State, we've been able to get, current and former law enforcement to come out and testify in support of the bill. And that, goes from state level officials to local DAs. There's also support amongst survivors of crime, because they also just realize that, tough on crime policies don't keep communities safer. And we all do really just benefit when, you allow people to reintegrate and you give them the tools to, contribute to society in a positive way. And then to deal with, to answer your second question about election crimes, I mean, I think just realistically, a lot of people aren't disenfranchised for election offenses, and so it just seems like a disingenuous way to try to bar someone from voting. Like Stuart mentioned, Maryland has permanent disenfranchisement for people convicted of certain election offenses, and it's our understanding that no one has ever been convicted or is disenfranchised because of that policy. So it really wouldn't serve any purpose.
And during the presentation, you mentioned that 75% of those who were disenfranchised in Delaware were African American. Is there a sense of how many Delawareans we're talking about?
Yeah, it's in the hundreds at least.
Okay.
And also, just to correct, that's only the people who are on probation and parole, but not the people who are incarcerated currently.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Are there any additional questions from members of the committee? Mr. Sherrod?
Yes, I just have another question. I think this pertains more to Delaware. I'm wondering, as we're looking at increasing voting numbers, and as I read some of the reports from the center, should we put the word out to the general community, number one, to ask politicians about their position on disenfranchisement relative to persons who have been incarcerated, and to find out where they stand on that. And number two, I guess it's a program for this committee to try to get the word out to the general community to understand that if persons have met the state's requirements for being able to be as they are reinstated in the community, to be able to vote. And as I read these reports, it just appears that just a lot of misinformation among officials, and also the fact that as people in the community come in contact with folks who have been incarcerated, that they don't know where they are and what their abilities or capabilities are as far as voting. So just wanted to throw those things out as, again, some goals and missions for us as a community, but also for the state of Delaware.
So, what we've realized in doing this work is, there are many people that are absolutely sincere and really care about, having expansive access to our democracy, that just don't really think about this issue. I mean, I'm curious how many people that are, a part of today's meeting knew what Delaware's law was before our presentation. I'm someone who, does this work, and Delaware's law is so complicated. I don't know if I could answer on the fly what it is. And so I think it's just an issue. It's a collateral consequence that many people just don't think about. And you're also dealing with the reality that people that are impacted by criminal disenfranchisement laws can't interact with the political system by the nature of their felony conviction. And so it's an issue that, legislators necessarily don't have to pay attention to. And yeah, we have a very long record at the Brennan Center of working on this issue at the state and federal level. And, we would be so thrilled for, you all to recommend to the larger task force taking a look into this issue. And we partner with advocates and legislators to help states to change their laws.
Excellent, thank you. I see we have a question from Captain Fahim Akil.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. I just want to actually accent from what the gentleman stated, but I just want to ask you, how receptive has your committee or the center been with the presentations? And when I ask about that, as I read through some of the slide presentations, where we're at here, but where we've always been, where most people don't want to be, is have these conversations about whether people are disenfranchised or is held back from some type of system. So how receptive are you for other people who may not feel as though, like some of the things that the presentation talk about, racist policies or racist documentations within a certain time? Most people don't consider themselves racist, and they consider themselves as that, hey, you each will have the opportunity if based upon all those other things. So I'm asking you is, how receptive are you to the general population when you bring these presentations, not only at a committee, but just in the general public? And how receptive do you think, or what are some of the things that you could think that could bring people about to have the conversation? Because even though you're talking about the disenfranchisement of voting rights, it'll splinter out to everything else because of the things that have happened before. So that's basically just trying to get your comment on that.
Well, one thing I would add, as a level setting, is that we go really deep into the history to find motivation and really where this really came from, and we don't think that that's really, it's very hard to deny that history, that it's just kind of there. But in the present day, disenfranchisement affects people in Delaware of all kinds. It has an extreme disproportionate impact on people of color, but there are white people of every race and every color who are impacted by this law and have been for generations. And on top of what we had shared prior, this de facto disenfranchisement issue, there are so many people that think that if you've ever gotten involved with the criminal justice system, that you're disenfranchised for life. And thankfully, that's not the case in Delaware. But so many people think that and they never register to vote. They never engage in their democracy. And that, again, impacts people of every background. So the pushback is definitely real. There's a reason why these laws were put on the books, and there's a reason why they haven't been reformed in many states just yet. But what we found is that when we explain this issue to people, and when we work in coalition with all the different people who I shared earlier, who are concerned about this issue and believe it should be changed, people change their minds. Like Patrick said, many people first off just are not aware of this to begin with, if they are at all. And that people really do, especially when they hear directly from directly impacted people who share their story and explain just how invested they are in their communities, how they are like more model citizens than even I am, despite their backgrounds. But for some reason, my voice matters and counts in democracy, and theirs doesn't. So the opposition is real, but what we found is that when people come together and we have conversations about this, and we share the facts, and we share the history, and we let people explain their stories, people change their minds. And that's part of why, really in the last couple of decades, where the general thinking of criminal justice has changed so rapidly, I think that's part of why we've seen such rapid progress on this issue. Would you like to add anything?
So I would just quickly add, building on the point that Stuart made, that restoring voting rights is just an issue that touches on both democracy and criminal justice that really is popular. And to give an example of this, I'll point to California. So in 2020, there were upwards of maybe 11 or 16 proposed amendments on the ballot in November 2020. And those ballot measures, touched on removing the ban on affirmative action, rent control, ending cash bail. And then there was an initiative called Proposition 17 that ended disenfranchisement for people on parole. And that amendment passed while the amendments related to rent control and cash bail failed, and nearly 60% of voters supported Prop 17, showing that this is an issue that's supported by voters from all walks of life. And I say this all the time when I'm talking to people in different states, but I feel like if you were to walk up to a random person and say to them, do you think you should be able to vote if you're not imprisoned? I think most people would agree with that notion. And so, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the technical supports that you provide that the Brennan Center provides to states looking at this issue? And I mean, in particular, looking at Delaware and our current legislation and how it may begin to be changed, and what, I guess, from your aspect, you see as the challenges?
Sure. So we like to think of ourselves as a one-stop shop. So we provide, we have lawyers, I'm a lawyer, and in the legislative work that I do, we provide support with drafting legislation, also with amendments. We provide support with, legal research in states that have changed their policies via executive order. We've prepared, memos and executive orders. We also provide support with communications, and that support can range from op-eds, ghostwriting op-eds, to providing support with talking points to help respond to opposition messaging. We also, hopefully it would never come to this in Delaware, but in Florida, we worked on Amendment 4. We were part of drafting the constitutional provision. And unfortunately, when the legislature responded by passing a law requiring people to pay off their court debt, we filed a lawsuit to help prevent that from happening. And we also provide support with lobbying. We work with advocates. So we really are a one-stop shop.
Excellent, thank you. I see there's an additional question from Captain Akil.
Not so much a question. I just want to let the committee and the presenters know that I appreciate the information, but I have to go to another meeting. So I just want to, let them know that it's getting off, and I appreciate their time. So if you see me get off, it's not because I'm not interested. I just want to let everybody know.
Appreciate it, Captain Akil. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. And I'll just say overall, I'm not sure, I don't see any other questions, but I think the presentation, again, is definitely in line with the work of our committee. We focused a lot on the crime, but I think in the public safety, but really looking at the justice side of our work of our committee. I think this really suits, and it's definitely something as we begin to consider our recommendations and the work that we think will be the steps forward. I think that engaging with your center and trying to come forward with some attempts and legislative efforts to address some of the challenges that have been presented. And I totally feel that it goes in line with our work. I think the overarching issue, especially in terms of re-entry, in terms of citizens who are re-entering the community, this is yet one of the challenges that they face, and one in which realistically, when you look at it, we can remove barriers, we can remove burdens, and begin to help individuals feel that they are again part of our communities, part of our society on the whole. It's that cloud, that dark cloud that follows individuals when they are returning to the community with certain crimes, that they feel hopeless and they feel that this cloud is always over them and they have nowhere else to go. So they return back to that same life that unfortunately led them to be incarcerated in the first place. So I think that having as many opportunities and laws that truly support re-entry and truly support individuals reintegrating into our communities, the better, and not just truly in limited fashions. I mean, I remember Senator Margaret Rose Henry's bill and how this was a great effort, even when it was 5 years and it was it was a great step forward. And now that you look at it in today's sense of racial and social equity, and you see how there is still work to be done. So I truly think in honor of our former Senator Margaret Rose Henry and so many others who fought on this issue, that this is definitely one that we should continue to pick up the mantle and do what we can and through our African American task force to ensure that this issue is one that we present in our recommendations, and one that we look to legislatively bring sort of some redress. I will ask again if there are any other questions from members of the committee. Seeing no questions, I would again like to thank Stuart and Patrick for their presentation this afternoon. It's been, again, as Captain Akil mentioned, it was very informative. One, I think again that aligns right along with our work. And again, one that I feel can be very helpful toward our overall objectives and for the African American Task Force truly being successful in its work. So again, thank you both for your time today. And I look forward to being further engaged with you and have you maybe even potentially come back as we can think about for this subcommittee how we can bring some of your efforts and supports into our recommendations that we will present to the full African American Task Force.
We would absolutely love that. That would make our year. So we look forward to continuing to work with you and the subcommittee. So thank you so much. We're so appreciative.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time, and we really appreciate your attention to this important issue.
Thank you both, and thank you for your work, and again for the presentation. And for members of our committee, we will move forward to the next agenda item, and agenda item 4, which was just a discussion on our safety and justice subcommittee. As our committee, the African American Task Force itself, we're beginning to, some subcommittees have already presented interim recommendations, and we wanted to begin to formulate our recommendations from our subcommittee. A lot of our work, we've had a lot of small group meetings and discussions with various groups. Met with our police chiefs and the children's department and services for youth and families and their rehabilitative services and a few other groups and community groups about just community violence on a whole, but also looking at in terms of what can be done to, a lot of it is restoring the sense of public safety in terms of working with communities to develop plans to have better relationships and better working relationships with law enforcement. Key items looking at firearms and legal firearms and their track and the difficulty that these firearms not only coming into our state, but trying to prevent them from coming into our communities and being in the hands of individuals who shouldn't have them. Just so many challenges that I mean, the safety and justice are, everything under our scope is so vast. And when you think of even adding, as discussion today, voting rights, but all in total, looking at reentry services, I think that is a topic. So maybe for our next meeting to have reentry services in total as a discussion item, agenda item, because I think that truly reentry and providing additional supports for members of our community who are returning from incarceration, if we can truly, honestly, within our state, do that in a manner that is more effective, a manner that is not limited, but in a manner that truly recognizes the challenges that individuals face, I think we can have a better, we'll help and truly be a part of the empowerment process allowing individuals to have a greater opportunity of success when they reenter our community. So I think that that is definitely something that ties to the justice component of our work. And I look forward to us continuing these conversations on this. And again, from my aspect, a lot of the summaries and a lot of the, I guess, will be maybe ideals toward recommendations from the meetings that have been held, trying to bring those all together and have, I guess, just summarize them. And as a body, we can begin to see what areas we really want to focus on in terms of the recommendations that we would present to the full African American Task Force. Are there any questions or feedback from members? Mr. Sherrard?
Representative, just another suggestion, I guess. Is it possible to have some agency in the Delaware government that would send information to persons who are released from or have served their time and are re-entering the society, if there was a letter of explanation about their voting status, so that those persons would not be of the opinion that they are no longer, they've been totally disenfranchised, even though our law in Delaware says something contrary to that. But I'm wondering, just to give a shove to those individuals that are being released, to send them a letter or something saying this is your position. You are now eligible to vote, just to kind of move the mountain there a little bit.
No, I truly agree. I think that, again, I think that having someone from a professional from that field who deals with reentry and can speak to us about what currently takes place and what are some of the challenges that they face, I think that will be another, as a good future agenda item for us, and to let us know hands down what's happening and how do individuals who are returning perceive their voting rights. So I think that, again, would be a good agenda item when we can get members in to tell us what happens. I think, as the presenters mentioned, about having a good communication plans along with your legislation, so that individuals know that when laws change, that this is the communication strategy that accompanies that legislation, so that the community is aware of the changes and that the individuals who are impacted by the legislation realize and know the changes that the legislations have brought to them. Ms. Minatola?
Yes, when you were speaking about reentry and having some presentations on that, I would ask that part of that maybe consider also criminal records and some of the barriers to expungements or pardons for individuals. We've done a lot of work on that recently, and I know some of the barriers we see are the costs associated with it, or the difficulty for someone, say, living in Wilmington, to have to travel to Troop 2 to get their fingerprints done to get the certified record. So maybe some discussion is that, as well as obviously records hinder people's ability to get jobs and to move on, and maybe ways that we can help with those barriers.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think those are good points, and hopefully with our presentation, we can line up some good presenters who can truly try to bring forward give us the information to address the challenges that they present within our state and our community for individuals who are returning. I think those are excellent ideas. Thank you. And in terms of, I know in my mind, I'm thinking of the Hope Commission, but I'm wondering if any of the panelists, any of the committee members have any other ideas of individuals we may contact in terms of reentry services. Mr. Price?
Thanks, Representative. I mean, there's some folks from DOC that come to my mind anyway. I don't know if Lisa or Chief Deputy Mackler have worked with anyone in particular, but Jessica Klein from DOC used to be the head of their reentry. So, and I think she's the deputy chief there now.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So are there any additional questions, comments, from members of the committee? Caitlin?
Thank you, Representative. I just want to make a note about housekeeping. In terms of scheduling future meetings, we should do that sooner than later. The entire task force is due to submit its final report to the General Assembly before Election Day this year. And I believe ideally our co-chairs want our final report to be done before the end of session, which is June 30th. So I just share that so that, you know, we can schedule future subcommittee meetings to have these presentations on reentry and get to the point where we can vote on recommendations. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to try to schedule the next meeting right now, since we have, you know, a quorum of members on the call.
That would be great. I know that, I mean, next month is JFC for me, so I'm open, and I don't know if there are dates that are better for you in terms of support staff, but I'm definitely open next month. I'm just making sure, but any Friday, or Fridays are good. Any Friday next month is good for my calendar to schedule a follow-up and have a presentation regarding reentry services and support. Are there any dates in particular that are good for members?
February Friday is good for me, so no problem there for me.
Okay, thank you. So we'll, let's see, that'll be about 3 weeks. So if we go for either the 11th or the 18th, any objections to either of those dates for members?
And what about time of day?
This time works for me. I know Representative Moore isn't able to join during the day due to her school schedule, but this time works for me.
Okay.
I'm okay with this time. Matter of fact, I like it very much.
Okay.
Great. So if you'd like, Mr. Chair, I can arrange a meeting request with our DTI staff. How about February 18th at 1 p.m.?
Yes.
Just figure that gives us plenty of time to meet the FOIA notice requirements.
Okay.
All right, great. Well, then I will also send out a calendar invitation. So please, everyone, be on the lookout for that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And we can move to the next agenda item, open up for public comment. I'm not sure I don't see anyone from the public on the call, but if members who are watching via the telecast, if they are interested in making a public comment, you can email your comments to African American Task Force at Delaware.gov. Again, that's the African American Task Force at Delaware.gov is where you can send your public comment. And the next we'll go to our final agenda item, which is our closing. And again, I just thank everyone for participating in the meeting. Again, look forward to our next meeting, February the 18th, where we will have representatives. Our topic will be reentry, and we have individuals speaking on reentry and some of the challenges that leads to within our community in terms of justice for constituents in Delaware. Seeing no additional further comments, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
It's been moved in second that the meeting be adjourned. So I'll now call that this meeting ended of the African American Task Force Safety and Justice Subcommittee. Thank you all again for your participation and involvement on this subcommittee. Thank you.
Locating the stream has ended. Thank you.